Thank you very much. My name's George Butler. Thank you for having me along. I'm actually not going to talk about climate or conservation, but I hope some of these ideas of storytelling and creativity might feed into some of the education bits that I know that you all are doing. In 1917, Senator Hiram Johnson said this this quote, "The first casualty of war is truth." And 100 years later, I find myself on a rooftop in West Mosul as an artist drawing the war against ISIS. This was the Iraqi army and the Peshmerga on the forefront of the war against the Islamic State. And I was embedded as a journalist. I was taken with the special forces to one of the rooftops where they were guiding in missiles to these ISIS positions. And we were told to keep our heads low, and we were there with a few other journalists. It's quite chaotic. I remember a couple of cameramen sitting by the wall. I remember a general in the corner. And after about 10 minutes or so, the general turned around to everyone and he said, 30 seconds. I was trying to work out what was going on. The cameramen were putting their cameras on the walls. Then he said 10 seconds, 3 seconds, 2, 1. And there's this enormous explosion, rips in from the sky, obliterates a building, dust cloud piles over us, we duck behind the wall. All the cameramen, of course, have pressed record. And at the same time, the general is having a sip of tea and looking through his binoculars. And so on the one hand, there's these 30 seconds of film that you get in the evening at the 10 o'clock news, which the cameramen have recorded. And on the other, I'm sitting there quite parochially making this drawing. And it occurred to me that in all situations, and possibly the ones that you're talking about today, there are many truths. None more true than the other, I guess, and in war there's often 2 or 3. But it has been my mission, albeit self-appointed, I guess, to try and offer an alternative to this very narrow spectrum of the way that our modern news industry tells us stories. So it's passive, it's often misinformed, it can be fake, and my solution to that is to be analog, to sit quietly, to listen to people for a little bit longer than you might do. And drawing has been my excuse to do that. This is an image in Bucha, that famous tank convoy that was probably more photographed than anything, caught up and ambushed as the Russians tried to get towards Kiev. Most recently, I have sort of deployed this tactic, I suppose, in Ukraine. And this was a lady called Madame Olga. She was 99, and we met her in her 4th floor apartment. She was too frail to get out of bed and too frail to get down the stairs when the air raid sirens went off. So she waited on the top floor, and she was very confused because she was trying to tell a story, but she was muddling Hitler with Putin and Putin with Hitler. And then in this moment of clarity, she looked up at me and my friend Ollie and said, "If you all stop asking questions, I'll tell you the story from the beginning." And she did. She was born in 1923. She survived the Holodomor, which killed 4 million Ukrainians. She was taken to a collective farm and worked with her father. And then when the Germans came, she was taken to Dresden to work as a slave. She had to eat worms, she ran away from home, the police caught her, she was sent back, and eventually the Soviet soldiers came and liberated that area, and she began to walk home back to Ukraine. She herded 130 cows across that part of the world, and then she got married and had 4 children and lived another 80 years until I met her. And of course my moment with her was completely insignificant in her life, but very significant for mine, and made all the more poignant, I suppose, by the fact that she died a couple of months afterwards, peacefully in her sleep. But if it hadn't been for drawing and for sitting quietly and listening, then I would have never had the chance to spend that time with her. Also, I guess, there is context to all of these things, and this is perhaps one of the most photographed moments in the Ukraine war. The realization of the world that the Russians had been doing all the things that the Ukrainians had said they were doing, and in this case, shooting civilians and putting them in mass graves. And it seems, I guess, almost inappropriate to photograph or record or draw these moments, but I feel that illustration is perhaps a gentle way of trying to comprehend those moments. It seems unthreatening and available and open, and it seems like others can do the same as you. I'm only holding a piece of paper and a pen, and that feels like all the drawings that I've done, unlike cameras, often are done with the permission of the people in front of me. So they're not captured or manipulated or shot. These are all words we use associated with photographs, but it's drawn and interpreted. These are some drawings I made in Afghanistan. I'll flick through them quickly. A young man who had been caught in a suicide bomb outside the Russian embassy last year. Haji Zubair, he was 25. He died before he got to the hospital. And I suppose the reason for drawing this, standing in that room and drawing it, was the look in the Kabuli ambulance driver's eyes as he held onto the stretcher. A kind of reminder, I suppose, of the 20 years that the Americans and the US and the English have spent in that country, and whether it's been what it's been worth, or whether it's been worth anything at all. And in contrast to that, this was an image. There are some less miserable slides, I promise. In contrast to that, this is one. In contrast to that, 2 weeks later at the end of my stay, I drew this moment, which is the cesarean of a woman called Lida. She was 25, and they brought this little boy into the world halfway up the Panjshir Valley and into the arms of Fatana, the scrub nurse, and the other Afghan surgeon. And that was a real moment of kind of great joy and positivity that this could happen in that place that we often think of as scary and far away and intimidating. This is the Turkish earthquake. This is the Bukit apartment building 6 days after it collapsed on itself at 4 o'clock in the morning, before anyone had time to get up for work, before they got up to pray. And there were 10 floors, probably 4 flats on each floor, a family in each. It was complete chaos. I remember that everybody was covered in dust. I remember that the silence when they asked the whole street to be quiet, turn off all the machines in case they heard somebody under the rubble. It was freezing cold. There was a smell of the bodies under the concrete by this time. And then if that wasn't horrific enough, opposite them sat their families waiting for their loved ones to be returned to them. And so they brought out the furniture from other people's homes, they burnt wood, they sat in the playground in this case, and had this sort of horrific vigil on the off chance that their loved ones would be found, which of course many of them weren't. But I'll just finish on this sort of short story. As I drew this, there was a boy called Uday who walked up to me, and he looked over my shoulder and he pointed out his grandmother and his mother and his father who were sitting in front of him, and he said, those are my family. And then he said to me, what are you going to do with this drawing? Can I have a copy of it? And I thought I had offended him. I thought I was about to have done something that was sort of completely unacceptable or haram. And I looked at him and said, why do you want this? And he took the pencil from behind my ear and he wrote his phone number on the top of the page. And he said, it's so that I can remember. And a year ago, it's been almost exactly a year since I made this drawing, and I have remembered that moment ever since then. And I think there's something very powerful about illustration, or even just the interaction of, perhaps it's nothing to do with the drawing, perhaps it's just that interaction of knowing that somebody else in the world also has shared that moment with you, is enough. And so we've been in touch, and I've shared this image with him, and he probably never wants to look at it again, but that idea of remembering has stuck with me since then. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, George. Very powerful. And if you don't mind, if you take a seat, you don't need to go anywhere right now. And if you've got any questions for George, I just want you to think of them, maybe write them down, because we're going to bring Amelia up, and what we're going to do is then have Amelia, and then we're going to have a short panel discussion, and you can answer George some of his questions there. But I'm sure you found that very powerful. And one of the things I think, you know, what I just learned from what George has just done there is how that perspective brings humility to horrifying situations. And, you know, you can hear it in George's voice, but also you can see it in the images that he's captured in situations that have been really terrifying situations. So thank you very much. And now I'm going to hand over to Amelia. Amelia, please introduce yourself.
Yes, so I'm Amelia Scudamore, a pleasure to be here, and I work for the Zoological Society of London, so really delighted that we're here at London Zoo today. So I just wanted to give us a bit of a whistle-stop tour about conservation, about the power of climate change and the links between climate change and biodiversity, but also in the context of education at our conservation zoos. So I think everybody is aware we live on an absolutely extraordinary planet. We live amongst extraordinary wildlife and ecosystems. So we have the Mary River turtle here, which is an animal that breathes out of its genitals. So some really fantastic animals here. However, I think we are all aware that our planet is facing the next biggest extinction crisis. So it's called the Holocene, and it's led by human impact. So that is climate change and biodiversity loss. It's a very stark future for us. And in that light, so we have our scientists at the Institute of Zoology at ZSL who monitor population declines. And again, the figures are tough. We've seen a 69% average fall of species populations between 1970 and 2018. That's 69%. There are 1 million species of plants and animals which are threatened with extinction. And only an increase of 1.5% could see the loss of up to 90% of the world's warm water corals. And if you've been watching the news this week, we did see that 1.5% announced 2 days ago. So we are really reaching the threshold of what our planet can recover from. But there is hope. Although we are seeing a steady decline in the loss of nature, we can bend the curve. At ZSL, we are protecting species, restoring ecosystems, training professionals, and creating change. So there is hope. But what does that look like in practice at ZSL? So we are communicating our science to governments to inform decision-making. And to one of the other speakers' points a bit earlier today, biodiversity loss and climate change are intrinsically linked, and we must tackle these together to create real change. We are working in the field to protect wildlife in our global programs. We work in between up to 70 countries to deliver protection of these animals. And we're empowering local communities and enabling them to diversify their incomes in the wake of climate change. And also, you know, we are at London Zoo today, so we certainly need to talk about the fact that we care for endangered species here, including those which are extinct in the wild. So we care for 17 species which would simply not exist if it wasn't for zoos and other similar biodiversity institutions. And vitally, we are engaging the next generation with wildlife to change the future. And the great news is that we know it works. So this is just a very quick slide on the fantastic scimitar horned oryx. I wanted to mention this because this species we've been working on for about quite a few decades now. It's We have bred the animals. It was actually one of our very first breeding programs in the 1970s. We sent Caroline off to an American zoo. And as of the end of last year, I'm thrilled to announce that this species was declassified from extinct in the wild to endangered. So that is the first time that has happened for an extinct in the wild species. So that's very exciting. I appreciate that today we're talking about empowering the next generation, so I really wanted to touch base on some of the work that's happening at our conservation zoos and at ZSL as a whole. We are committed to inspiring change through learning. So in our scientific institute, which sits just above us here, in the last year we taught 91 master's students and 70 PhD students, working to embed the pupil to professor journey. We trained 60 vets this year through a partnership with the Royal Veterinary College and others. And along with delivering training across, that's alongside delivering training across our field conservation sites. So as you can see in the image here, it's anything from how to use instant detect cameras to monitor wildlife and to protect against poaching. But at our 2 conservation zoos, it's really exciting to let you know that in the last year we welcomed over 2 million people. And that also included 200,000 free and subsidized tickets for people on government benefits to make sure that as many people as possible can experience the joy of animals and nature at our zoos. So those tickets we saw an incredible uplift, and that was supported by the National Lottery Heritage Fund. And we also know that experiences at our zoos increases those connections. So with 60% of people saying they feel closer to nature after visiting one of our zoos, and 47% saying that they will do something to help animals after visiting. And we are driven to supporting the next generation, informing them about the state of the planet. So for those visiting our zoos, we deliver lessons that are in line with the national curriculum, providing real-life conservation learning for thousands of visiting school groups. We welcomed over 137,000 school students and taught over 1,000 education workshops on a range of topics, from impact of threats including climate change and plastic pollution, to the role we all play in protecting species and their habitats. We also had over 1,500 11 to 18-year-olds taking part in free online opportunities to meet our science and conservation experts. These are opportunities that we have here at ZSL, and we are so thrilled to be sharing these real-life contexts with students. But we also provided specific training to just under 300 teachers, training teachers and school staff on how to put nature in the heart of the curriculum and teach that curriculum outside of the classroom. So, as a charity, ZSL is reliant on our supporters to enable our work, especially as we are without government funding towards any of our core activities. We do this all ourselves. We are driven to securing a future for our shared planet by protecting ecosystems, mitigating biodiversity loss, and delivering nature-based solutions to reduce the impact of climate change. So as an example, replanting mangrove forests in the field. And we are committed to empowering the next generation, connecting them to nature, and giving them the tools they will need to make informed decisions on the future of our planet. That's it from me.
Thank you very much, Amelia. You guys are really well behaved. You know when to clap. I don't even need to ask you when to clap. So I'd like to invite Amelia, George back, and Rasha. Oh, Celine, great. If you would like to join the panel. Yes, absolutely you. We've got a spare seat. That microphone should be, so you can use that microphone. I'll probably use the lectern, and we'll invite some questions. Make yourself comfortable. So, if you've got any questions that you'd like to ask George, Amelia, Rasha, or Celine about ZSL and the initiatives, and also George, the work that he's doing. Alan, I've got you. So I'll hand it over to Alan for the first question.
The thing about news is that it's predominantly today video and sometimes audio. And I think we'd all recognize, without getting into naming names, there's areas of bias. And the challenge is actually communicating something that has empathy and that people can actually consume. The challenge with the places you go is that the images that come out of these places, people would like to look away from rather than look at. Then the second problem is language and bias. So any interview or any journalistic contribution is normally in a language, and by default, that language will have a bias depending on which side of the challenge you sit on. When you do illustration, illustration has no bias. It is a communication. It's then down to interpretation. It's then down to empathy. So the role and responsibility you have from an education point of view in terms of its assets to allow people to put their story on top of your work and your contribution is considerable. Would you like to elaborate on that?
Yeah, but you might have said it better than me, Alan. But I feel that that's right, and that there is space in an illustration and in an interpretation, especially with the white space, to superimpose your knowledge on something like that. And at the moment, that is completely in contrast to the way in which we receive most of our news. So it's digital, it's fast, it's delivered in sort of populist one-liners, it could be fake, it could be misinformed, and it's also controlled by a couple of very powerful individuals in the world. So this is an antidote, I think, and I'd like it to be more in that I'm sharing it with you, but really it's my own antidote. It's my excuse to sit with people and to put my phone down, and I recommend that everybody tries that, and drawing is my way of doing it. So I hope there is some legs in it, that there might be a revival of sort of illustrated news. This is an old formula. 1842, the Illustrated London News started, and it captured people in their armchairs all over the world. So we know it works. We just have, it's sort of like an old dialect. We've forgotten how to speak it, and a little bit like the stuff that you guys are doing. We know it's important, and we know that kids value it, and we know that we need to do it, but at the moment we're all looking the other way.
Thank you. And I really love that answer, because you know, one of the things that I observe is quite often when things are videotaped and somebody's behind a camera or the video camera, they seem very much like a subject, but what you bring, George, is a real human-to-human connection. So, and it allows people to be witnessed rather than be objectified. So, yeah, no, thank you so much. Any other questions for, yes?
Since doing this work, how do you think it's impacted your outlook on life? And do you think it's had any impact on your mental health? And if so, how have you combated it? Sorry, very long question.
How long have you got? Yeah, it definitely impacted in many good ways. Well, mostly, perhaps surprisingly, in a positive way. I get to obviously sit and listen to some very sad stories, but also at the end of those stories, the person usually takes me under their wing and says, "Come and meet my family, come to my shop, would you like to stay in touch?" And so there is this hopeful and positive element to all of these stories. And I think I carry that. I think the drawing is a way of kind of comprehending that, and sort of art as my own therapy. And there is a real relief when I get to share those stories, because obviously I sat with Madame Olga and promised her daughter Valentina that I would do that. So it's, I think if I locked them in a drawer in my studio and never saw them again, that would be a different sort of voyeurism. But sharing them, it seems important.
Thank you. Just some other questions.
Thank you. So this might actually be for all of you. And I guess it might help by doing a bit of an intro quick. So if you don't know, my partner here is the most amazing school group owner, so bricks and mortar, and my team and I do some incredible things with an online school. But the key, I think, with what we've heard is you all do such incredible work that we know needs to reach the next generation. So how can people like Anita and I get this so it's not a part of what schools are doing, but it's the heart of what they do?
I think the narrative that we've been talking about a bit today is about storytelling, and I think, although it was much clearer in George's than it was in mine, I think it's about how we can tell the story better for the next generation. And so it's a really key focus for us as at ZSL as an organisation to make sure that the key information is being shared. I think there is also something for the next generation of kids. This is about children rather than curriculum, I appreciate, which is not your question, but it's quite scary out there, actually. And so we do look a lot about the impact of the future of the planet and these discussions happening on young people's mental health as well. So we are also dually conscious of that. But I think some of the work that we're doing to really engage schools and school teachers and supporting them on curriculum that they can be excited and feel confident in their ability to deliver back to their schools has also been really important in an area that we're looking to grow. So very multifaceted, but lots and lots of opportunity, which is this session.
Yeah, before we move on, yeah, if there's somebody else that'd like to answer the question.
Hello, good morning. I didn't get a chance to present, so I don't know if you know what I work on, or maybe I can say a few words. My name is Céline Semaan, I'm Lebanese. I live in New York City, and I run an organization called Slow Factory. Slowing down factories of oppression is the best way I can describe it. But we do a lot of work in education and education towards the next generation, and we're working on climate issues, on human rights. Our focus is the intersection of both. And to answer your question, for us, we work with the next generation through play. You know, we don't address climate through this lens of guilt and shame and horror and doom. We really work around the topic, not in toxic positivity, but through putting our fingers in the soil and putting our fingers in understanding seeds and how seeds grow, and doing these activities with children, teenagers, is extremely therapeutic, and it's almost like, you know, ecology as therapy. And we do a lot of these immersive experiences in nature, because nature is becoming less and less accessible to a lot of us. You know, people living in urban settings, people living anywhere around the world, really. And my kids recently just saw an entire forest being cut down in New York City, and they are extremely sad and asking everyone, are you sad when you see a tree being cut down? And so these are the questions that these kids are asking. How do we restore our planet when we're continuously extracting from it? And these are the questions that are, you know, somewhat philosophical, but also that we could address through education and play and art. So I don't think I have like the ultimate solution for the whole world, but it's very important to bring back play into our conversation around climate.
Thank you, Celine. And Rasha, I think have you got an answer? Do you have a response?
I don't know if I do have an answer, but I'd say that one of the answers is collaboration and being here all together. And this is a testament to standing side by side, being able to raise our voices and raise awareness and, play together, talk about these solutions, talk about these issues together, and, find new solutions together and build new bridges of hope. That's what we need to be doing right now. And the more that we do that with new friends around the world, then we'll get, we'll be able to get and build much better things for the future.
Perfect. For somebody who didn't have an answer, that's a great answer. And Celine, what I'd like to say is if we can slot you in later, I would love to get your presentation so we can see that great work that you're doing. So we also have some other questions, so I'll come to you after Alan.
Thanks. Morning, everybody. This is a question for Amelia, and I'm kind of sitting here in a position of hero worship, actually. As a as a kid, I grew up going to Whipsnade on a yearly basis, and kind of wondering what half the animals were that were running around, like the prairie dogs and what have you. And since then, I have been recently, and I think ZSL has taken over Whipsnade maybe in the last 20 years or so, something like that, or maybe it always has owned it, and I just didn't notice as a child. But I think my question is, how has Whipsnade itself actually improved over the last 30 years, and how has it actually changed to the way in which children and adults are engaging with the animals in order to learn certain things? I kind of speak specifically from remembering the falconry shows, for example. Is technology improving around how you deliver certain things as well?
Very good question. ZSL has owned Whipsnade since it was first founded. So it was always meant to be a different experience to the London Zoo experience. And for anyone who has been, it is 600 acres, so it is quite a substantial site. So well done for getting around it as well. I think it has evolved fantastically over time. We've really been focusing on key species, which we balance with the way that they're either critically endangered and how endangered they are. But it's also really, really important to make sure that visitors want to go and see them. So we call it hiding the vegetables a little bit on occasion. So as an example, at London Zoo, you might have an opportunity to go and see our new baby gorilla today, but you also, I hope, would have an opportunity to go and see our Socorro dove, which is a little brown bird in our Blackburn Pavilion, which is an extinct in the wild species. So we do a lot of work to make sure that we're drawing as many people in as we can to then engage them with a variety of animals. To your point, we still have some fantastic demonstrations, so all of our bird demonstrations to get kids really excited, but we do have a really extensive education program at Whipsnade Zoo as well. So there is a really big focus on community, and so as an example, we look at a variety of different projects from work experience, apprenticeships, and really focusing on young people who might have been in care, who've not had another family member at university before. We really want to make our zoos at the heart of their communities as part of the engagement with both students and with teachers. And to the point previously as well, it's when those kids come in, it's how do we also engage teachers to make sure that they're taking that curriculum back with them. So that activity with engaging just under 300 teachers was actually largely done at Whipsnade Zoo as well. So that was with local teachers one especially inspired teacher who was absolutely thrilled and wanted to get as many people in as possible, which is really great. We're also doing a bit of activity around, remember how I mentioned the subsidised tickets? So we're doing that also to focus on schools. So we have a new education access programme. So it's not meant to be financially driven, so a school can visit as many times as they like for one £500 set fee this year. And that's really, again, to continue that journey of storytelling for young people coming to visit our zoos, because you've been to the zoo. Whipsnade Zoo was huge. Takes a lot to go and see, but actually, if you can visit primates on one day and learn about how they engage, how they eat, how they do X, Y, Z, and then come and see the elephants the next day and see that as well. It's all about continuing their connection and journey with nature. So I could pontificate for a very long time, so I'll wrap it up there. But yeah, thank you very much.
Can I just pick up on that theme, because I think that there is a lot more to say, and let me give you my context. You know that I work very closely with Rasha, and Rasha sits on the ZSL board for the zoo, but there's a lot of history here. There's 198, in fact I stand corrected, 199 years of research, dating back to Darwin, dating back to research that is extraordinary. The challenge, I would suggest respectfully, is how many people read research papers that are written in language that most of us don't understand and needs to be disseminated into consumable media and consumable modular segmented content that could be available. But you are sitting on probably one of the richest archives of knowledge in conservation in the world, bar none. Second point, what I also found out by speaking to ZSL senior management is that, as against most other industries and organizations, you're actually friends with your competitors. In other words, whether it's Whipsonade or New York Zoo or San Francisco or Los Angeles or Beijing Zoo, you all have the same modus operandi, you have the same ambition, aspiration. So not only is your research relevant to your local community, it's relevant to the world. Then you come to what the other young lady just touched on, which is that conservation is one part of a very important jigsaw, which in my language is a combination of conservation and climate change, which, by the by, happens to be probably the most important subject, bar none, in the world right now. Not only from a point of survival, but also if you go on to something else, which we will discuss a little bit later this morning, it comes down to what is described as social and emotional learning. In other words, one of the challenges in schools today, and I can be corrected by my peers sitting to my right, is that we don't teach pastoral care the way that we taught it in my generation. We don't teach the social and emotional aspects that build character and build personalities. And the reason that I bring that subject up, specifically to the presentation you made, is that whether you like it or don't like it, you have a huge responsibility. Because you sit at the epicenter of the richest content, the richest research, the empathy that people have with the planet, the empathy that people have with animals, and the opportunity you have to escalate your resources to impact the world is beyond anything you've discussed so far. So if I haven't pushed you completely over the cliff, do you want to comment on any of that?
Thank you, firstly. It is a really fantastic place to be part of and to see it evolve. You're absolutely right. We are, I would say, with the exception of those who have visited our zoos perhaps as a child, we're not a very well-known brand. To your point again, absolutely, we have almost 2 centuries worth of incredible scientific discovery. It was our secretary at the time, our curator of birds, who said to Darwin, actually, I think those finches look a little bit different to each other. So we have this incredible opportunity to really engage people with our work. And I think that we are doing some things. We are doing some great things to say, as you say, of interpreting those really academic scientific papers so that they're palatable for the general population. And I include that in myself. I'm not a scientist. Which is actually why I mentioned the Merry River Turtle, which is a little bit outside of, it's on the cusp of appropriateness, perhaps. But that was a species that we don't work on, actually. That was a species that we listed in something called the Evolutionarily Distinct and Globally Endangered list. We classified it. We don't actually work on that species in the field. But when we classified it, we discovered this really fantastic story, and we promoted it as the Zoological Society of London. And to your next point about collaboration, the team in Australia who are working on that species, they ended up getting additional government support because of the way that it had been highlighted in the media and it had become this great sensation. So absolutely to your point that we have this incredible narrative and we are doing exceptional work moving forward about the state of the planet. And again, to your point about collaboration, the conservation community is exceptional at collaborating. The line that actually one of my predecessors had said is that you never want to walk into a conservation activity or monitoring program and see 4 camera traps on the same tree. I know that's a very rudimentary example, but it is very, very important from a collaborative perspective. But to your point, mostly, is that the opportunity is there. We have all of the tools that we need, and it's just about moving it forward, which is very exciting.
Excellent, thank you. Are there any other questions at this point? Yes, Eleanor?
Yeah, I have a question for George. I'm curious to know, from your experience of capturing stories analog, what would your desire be if you could teach young students about what it is that you're doing? What kind of education would you want to impart on them? What advice would you give them?
I think that any creative education at the moment would be good, and that often creativity is something that we think that we are either born with or without, because our art teachers aged 12 said we could or couldn't do it. And in fact, it exists in us as rhythm or colour or composition or drawing. There's not an individual way to be creative like we thought there was. So really, I think the great sadness and something to imagine when we're trying to recreate sort of digital learning is that everybody has an ability to be creative, and we've seen that in the caves of Charvet in France 35,000 years ago. So I think that would be my kind of advice, that it should be sort of stuck with and held alongside maths and English and science as equally valuable.
Perfect, thank you.
I've got a question, and any of you can answer this. I think part of it's what you were saying about moving it forward and telling a better story. I think there's a social and emotional side to learning and educating the next generation. I think it's part of storytelling. So my question is this: if you had to tell us a better story about climate change to the next generation that changes behavior, doesn't just tell them what you want them to know, but for them to truly understand climate change, what is the story that you would be telling? And maybe from a graphical point of view, if you were George's employer, where would you send George to tell a better story for us, to actually explain to the next generation what behavior must change in order for not species to die, but the human race to die?
I wouldn't want the human race to die. I think in indigenous knowledge and wisdom lies a lot of these stories that exist as the origin stories of how humans and nature are one and the same. There's a book that's very famous that's called The Giving Tree, and if you've read it, it's basically the foundation, I think, of climate change, because it's all about taking from that tree. The tree is the only one giving. And the stories that we tell children in the context of climate is quite the opposite of what that book is trying to say, where instead of taking from nature, you have to give nature. And that change of generosity between us and nature, from taking from the tree, taking everything from the tree until the tree dies and the boy is alone and sad, the notion of taking, extracting, a one-way relation, a transaction, is what we're trying to inspire the next generation. And I would go further than, just to piggyback on what you were saying, children are natural artists and scientists. They are born like that. They ask a million questions. That's the best quality of a scientist: asking questions, wanting to learn, curiosity. Without curiosity and creativity, we really are just robots, and honestly. And so fostering that in children, inspiring them to continue to be both artists and scientists, and understanding that their relationship to nature is their relationship to themselves. It's by giving that you are receiving the most. And these are the stories that, inspired by indigenous knowledge and indigenous storytelling, honestly, I live in occupied land in Turtle Island in so-called United States, and we work very closely with indigenous communities. And the stories, just origin stories of how human and nature are portrayed, contradict a lot of the stories that origin stories are told in the global north, for example, on how, for instance, we were taken away from Eden and we sinned, or we had to take something back, and all of these ideas of being at odds with nature rather than being at one with nature are very fundamental stories in countering climate change and changing our behavior as well towards nature. So I hope this was inspiring, not critical, because the point is really to inspire, and to inspire transforming our perspective between taking and giving.
Not to be a downer on it, but to your point, actually, which we haven't talked about from a conservation perspective because we were looking at opportunities and challenges, is that you're absolutely right in that the loss of biodiversity, the connection to climate change, and the impact on human health is coming down the line. And of course, about 5 years ago, I used to have to explain to people what a zoonotic disease was, and I don't have to do that anymore. So we know that biodiversity loss could result in a public health crisis again. So that's the downside of things. But the thing for me about the next generation and looking at conservation as an industry is, I heard a fabulous speaker, it's pretty depressing at times, and it can really turn people off. And I think for me, I appreciate that we're talking more about finite storytelling and narratives, but for me, it's about really instilling the hope for change. It's going to be okay. If people feel like they are empowered and that there is an opportunity for them to make a difference, we have to focus on that a lot as a conservation industry because those statistics are pretty tough. But how do you make sure and how do you instill in people that, and young people especially, who are looking at these enormous changes that are happening as we speak, and say you do have the power to be able to change the future of what happens to the planet. And it's those small things, every small thing, every small action, if that's asking your family and making sure that they're recycling or checking to see if they have sustainable palm oil. It's what are those small actions that everybody can take. And again, to link back to our zoos as well, what do we want people to walk away with when they visit the zoo? And it's simple, it's a connection or a love of nature, because from there it breeds everything else. So yeah, a few things in there, but there are lots and lots of things that we can ask those young people to do. But it's about educating, it's about providing that hope and that assurance that there is an opportunity for change, because they will be making those significant decisions into the future.
Excellent answers. Rasha, do you want to have a...
No? Yeah, fine.
No, that's fine. George, did you want to... You're good? All right. Well, what I'll do is... Okay, we've got another question. I'm probably going to leave this as the last question so we can... okay, if we leave it, so we just give everybody kind of 5 minutes to grab a drink and whatever before our next session so we can stay on time. But I think that's really great. I think, I invite you to think about what do you want to get away from, or what do you want to walk away with from today? Because it's great that we come here, we can listen to these, thought leaders, industry leaders, and think, wow, I'm inspired. But what can we do today? And to Celine's point, I think that's an excellent point, which is the giving tree. How do we go back and feed the roots of the tree that's given to us? And how can we do that with our children? How can we do that with our environments and everything else? So thank you very much for our panelists. Give them a round of applause, please.